Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're watching the dust settle on debate number 1 between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. 2 more to come, as well as a vice presidential debate. We're talking about it with Democratic strategist Richard Fowler, who joins us from Washington. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to James Robbins, a senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council and columnist for USA Today, here in the studio. Minter Dial, digital media consultant whose documentary, The Last Ring Home, screens November 12th.
11th.
11th. What am I saying?
Armistice Day. Veterans Day.
Armistice Day. On PBS in the United States. And journalist and blogger Jean-Pierre Larochelle, director of the Political Forum. We were talking before the break about some of the little jibes. We heard one from Donald Trump in the clip we played earlier. The one-on-one format allowed for the candidates to address each other more, shall we say, in a French style, right? It resembled a little bit more French debates than others, where sometimes these debates can be kind of press conferences that are stage managed. The temptation was there to interrupt. This handy little statistic compiled by 538.com. Hillary Clinton, 0 interruptions, 5 fleeting interjections. Donald Trump, 3 interruptions, 24 interjections. Minter Dial, good or bad for Donald Trump to be interrupting and interjecting that much?
My feeling is that for those who like strong leaders, that's the kind of style that appeals to them. If you're thinking more as a diplomat, you're thinking someone who's going to be reigning around the world, someone who interrupts is not someone who's well appreciated.
Richard Fowler, you agree?
Well, here's the thing. I think what we saw from Donald Trump yesterday was he was unhinged, and Hillary Clinton looked very stateswoman-like in her appearance and in her demeanor, and Donald did not. And I think that was the difference, and that's what the Clinton campaign was trying to make the contrast of, is that we are going to come out here, we're going to talk about the issues, we're going to dig deep, and we're going to have a conversation.
When he interrupts, is that good or bad for Hillary Clinton?
I think it's actually good for Hillary Clinton. I mean, I think he's been painted here in this country and I think throughout the world as a bully. And the more he interrupted her, the more he said wrong, the more, towards the end of the debate, the part that got me was where he talked about stamina. And he was like, she doesn't have the stamina. And he kept saying stamina, because he's trying to make the argument that because she is a woman, she doesn't have the stamina to be president of the United States. And so that sort of, when you interrupt her, very, very, very came off as, I would argue unpolite, and some would argue even bullying.
James Robbins, you agree?
I think it's because she does things like face plants in public at the 9/11 memorial. I think that has a lot more to do with the stamina argument. I think man or woman, if you're that unhealthy, then there's a problem. But something else that Richard said, I think isolates a problem for the Democrats. Using words like totally unhinged or completely unhinged. This is the caricature of Donald Trump that the Democrats have stuck to in their talking points. And at the debate, even though Mr. Trump did not have the message discipline that I think that he needed, he wasn't totally unhinged, completely a wild man and all this other stuff. And this is why I made the comparison in my column to Reagan in 1980. Ronald Reagan was also characterized by President Carter's team as this nuclear mad cowboy, this throwback, this fossil, this old man who doesn't know what he's doing. And he came across at the debate, which most analysts said that he lost on points, but he came across as reasonable. And I think that Donald Trump had to come across as a reasonable guy, particularly in speaking to his voters and to his base. And whereas his performance wasn't perfect, I think he accomplished what he needed to do.
But for going forward, just James, do you agree on the point that interrupting is bad for Trump and good for Hillary, that he should interrupt less?
I think that he should choose his interruptions. I thought that at first in the debate, he was doing it too much. Later on, I think he did it just the right amount. I mean, he can't let her get away with saying things that are completely untrue. But on the other hand, he doesn't want to feed that bully stereotype that the Democrats are pushing out there. So I think he just has to be selective.
All right, Trump did a better job of dropping the names of Rust Belt states, as we said at the outset. His America is losing mantra resonates there with those who've seen manufacturing jobs disappear, like when the candidates sparred over the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, that agreement with Canada and Mexico, which was signed into law under Bill Clinton.
Well, actually, I will bring back jobs. You can't bring back jobs.
Well, actually, I have thought about this quite a bit.
Yeah, for 30 years.
I have, well, not quite that long. I think my husband did a pretty good job in the 1990s. I think a lot about what worked and how we can make it work again.
Well, he approved
3 million
NAFTA.
new jobs,
He approved
a balanced
NAFTA,
budget,
which is the single worst trade deal ever approved in this country.
Incomes went up for everybody. Donald, I know you live in your own reality, but that is not the fact.
All right, not the fact, but actually, this is the key here in all of this, and I'll put it to you, Minter Dial. In the U.S., the jobless rate right now stands at 4.9%. You know what the jobless rate is in this country.
It's a lot higher. Double.
So but wages have stagnated mostly since 2008. And there's another story. Manufacturing jobs associated with those states, they accounted for nearly 1 in 4 jobs in the U.S. in 1960. Today, that number is in single digits. And it seems as though Donald Trump is really striking a chord in those states that have been hit the hardest.
Well, we've seen a couple of things. First of all, you see the whole economy is shifting with this digital world and manufacturing going away, people who only want to borrow things, not buy things. And so there's the whole economy is shifting around. The second thing that's interesting is that you've got what used to be a very democratic territory moving to other issues, just like we saw with Brexit in England, where a group of people that you would normally consider more democratic are looking at different issues. They're more involved with the steel story or the coal story and the pro-gun story and the pro-life story. And so they're more now swinging towards the Republicans, even though the rest of the economy is doing so much better.
James Robbins, his second sentence, the second thing we heard out of Donald Trump's mouth was jobs are moving to Mexico. And then he said afterwards, he complains about China. Point of fact, it's more a question, isn't it, that automation is what's killing those jobs?
That could be automation, shifts in the economy, what have you. But the fact is, there are people who are hurting, and no one's speaking for them, or traditionally no one has. Republicans and Democrats adopted the free trade mantra sometime in the 90s. Both parties signed on to it. And that was particularly telling for the Democrats because they were the ones who were essentially abandoning their union base, abandoning manufacturing workers, and going over to what had traditionally been a Republican issue of free trade. Now with Donald Trump, he has rejected the traditional Republican stance. So he is reaching out to those people who were abandoned by both parties, and they are responding to him. I mean, we could argue about what it really is and talk about statistics and things like that, but that's not what is motivating people. He has a vision that appeals to these folks. And as I said before, they are going to be the ones who decide the election.
Richard Fowler, you agree?
Yes and no. Here's the thing. The voters who care about trade deals, who are who are already leaning right, are already voting for Donald Trump, right? Those voters, I think, are already baked into the numbers that you see out there. What he had to do last night, and what every pollster, every analyst, even his own campaign has said, is that he had to talk to educated, white voters. He failed at that last night. The only good exchange he had was about trade, which we saw. And that was think about that. For about 10 minutes out of 90 minutes, he was good. For the other 80 minutes, he was awful. You could call it talking points, you could call it whatever you'd like, but the truth of the matter is, the educated white folks care about race in America. And to say that to solve race in America, we need law and order, and we need to bring back stop and frisk, which is a law that has been ruled to be not only unconstitutional, but it increases profiling and decreases trust between communities of colors and police departments. It's a problem. When he talked about ISIS, he didn't have a clear answer. When he talked about taxes, he didn't have a clear answer. So for 10 minutes, he got it right. For 80 minutes, he got it wrong, which is why he will not get those white, educated voters.
I would add one more thing was there's not just the race issue, but how he talked about women. And I think that Clinton certainly did a good job on that. The fact that he didn't shake Lester Holt's hand at the end, from what I saw.
No, he did shake it.
He did at the end?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I just thought
It took a minute. It took a minute.
Yeah, I'm sure it took him a minute.
No, I think the trade is an example where he really could have nailed Hillary. So she misstated her position, which she has done consistently on trade. So he called her out and said that she had called the TPIP the gold standard, and then she said, no, I didn't say that. She said I hoped it would be gold standard. So she's been called out on that before by Anderson Cooper and others. She didn't say she would hoped it would be the gold standard. She said it is the gold standard. So he was actually correct, and he should have really brought home that point. She made references to her book and her positions on trade. He could have mentioned the fact that her paperback edition of her book was edited to take out the support that she had for those trade agreements, because now she's against it. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities, and trade is one where he could really have demolished her.
Donald Trump's candidacy doesn't come in a vacuum, Jean-Pierre Larochelle, and tapping into that legitimate frustration among working class people in places we were talking about, like the Rust Belt. We're seeing in this country politicians with a populist message, most notably the far-right National Front, on the rise. How does a Hillary Clinton respond to that? And what's the way that she gets the better of that argument about trade?
Well, I think she's in a difficult position because she has taken conflicting positions on this, and it's not very clear. And she's always been, she's the exact opposite of Trump. Trump is the type of person who's very quick to state a position and doesn't rely on polls. She's very careful. She's relying on polls. She's more worried about making a mistake, and because of that, she gives a very nuanced response. And we saw in the case of Brexit, for instance, we saw this populist reaction, which rejected the experts and rejected the established advice to go their own way. And this is the type of appeal that Trump is making.
James Robbins, does that sort of scare you in a way? There's this sort of a backlash against the establishment, but it seems to also be a backlash. Some have called this the era of post-truth politics, a backlash against intellectual arguments.
Oh, I don't know. The notion that politicians lie about things is hardly a new one. I think that's as an old a trope as we have. Whether it's anti-intellectual, maybe the intellectuals have some things wrong, speaking as a PhD, I don't know. I do know this: if an election comes down to people with college degrees against people without college degrees, there are a lot more people without than people with college degrees. And maybe it's about time that the elites understood that there are people out there who have very serious concerns. When Hillary Clinton joked about how, she's going to put coal plants out of business because of, whatever trade or global warming or stuff. Well, you know what? There are people who their entire lives, their entire culture are built around the coal industry in Appalachia.
Not only coal plants, she said
Clinton
coal
also
workers.
Making these comments about the coal people. Well, that's just a microcosm, but it speaks to that smugness and that contempt that some of the elites have for, the regular Joes. And Donald Trump, yes, multimillionaire, billionaire, a guy who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. But, he's from Queens and he can speak the language. He has dealt with construction workers and union guys all his career. And so, he's not from that milieu, but he can speak to them. And I think that's what we're seeing in his movement, his insurgency.
Richard Fowler?
I don't think I'm saying the same thing in his movement at all. I think he has a really big problem speaking to regular people. Does he speak to regular white people? Absolutely. But does he speak to the emerging electorate in this country? One thing that folks need to know about America is that in about 10 years, in the next decade, African Americans and Latinos will be the majority of the United States of America. And Donald Trump has left every single solitary one of those voters behind, whether it be because he says he wants to build a wall and he wants to deport 11 million people who are here, or he says the best way to deal with the African American community is stop and frisk and more laws. Donald Trump has a real misconception about what the American people are looking for. What the American people are looking for is they're looking for strong, decisive leadership. And sometimes, every now and then, that leadership requires nuance, right? We saw what happened when you don't have nuance. You have the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan when there was no nuance. When there is nuance, you could really work on creating peace. You could really work on creating good trade deals. You could really work on regaining America's trust in the world. And so I think that's the difference between these two candidates. And I think it's clear as day. It's the difference between day and night, to be honest.
Minter Dial, the Americans complaining, Barack Obama, popular president as he ends his 8 years, much more so than the French one, but people are complaining.
Certainly over here.
But people complaining about no drama Obama, and is the fact that you have to be entertaining a very important qualification in this particular election?
Well, one thing you have to say about Trump is that he's been a master of social media and the non-paid media. And so I think at that level,
so he has double the number of tweets about him than Hillary Clinton this Tuesday.
Yeah, and he's actually tweeting his own, by the way, of course, not necessarily all perfectly well done, but he's done an amazing job on that level. And I think that's something that certainly deserves being pulled out, because spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these political campaigns, I find that just atrocious, mostly because I live over here.
All right. At the end of the day, it's who wins the election, not who wins the debate. Clinton clinging to, according to the survey done by 538, to a narrow 278 to 259 electoral vote lead. They've crunched different poll data. 270 is the magic number when it comes to the Electoral College in the United States. It's pretty close, Jean-Pierre La Rochelle. After last night's debate, are we going to see that narrowing of the gap stop? Is Hillary Clinton now going to get a bit of a bump?
Well, what we didn't have happen yesterday was there was no real decisive blow to really put this out. They're pretty much in a dead heat. And, of course, a lot of the states are clearly always going to vote either Republican or Democrat. So what's really important is these swing states. And he's doing relatively well in some of the swing states. So Ohio has been one, for instance, where Trump has been showing as leading and is a key state. Florida as well, and he's very close in Pennsylvania. So I think that is really what's going to decide the election.
Those three states, you agree, Richard Fowler?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think this race will come down. There's no Republican that's ever won the White House without going through Pennsylvania and Ohio. So I think that's where this game is going to come down to. Hillary Clinton's firewall is Pennsylvania and Virginia, which is another battleground state. I think Donald Trump is going to be in Virginia sometime later today. The vice presidential debate's there next week. So I think what you're going to see in the Clinton camp is you're going to see them really double down on their strongholds, like places like Philadelphia, places like Pittsburgh, places like Scranton in Pennsylvania. And I think you're also going to see the same when she's going to go down to southern Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, the Keys, and really work there on trying to make sure she can firm up her base and turn out those voters in record number for her. She's going to have Obama-like turnout in 2008, 2012 to make sure she maintains her firewall, which is the state of Pennsylvania.
I'm seeing Jean-Pierre La Rochelle shake his head. He doesn't see it.
Well, that is exactly the one thing that Hillary doesn't have, is she doesn't have the enthusiasm that Obama had in the first election. So even the people that support her, they're not enthusiastically supporting her. It's largely an election of people that don't like Trump supporting Hillary, and to some extent, people supporting Trump because they don't like Hillary.
James Robbins, you getting very much the sense that it is a plebiscite for or against Trump?
Not necessarily. I don't think it's a plebiscite for or against him. I think that it is a clear choice between two visions of America. I think it's noteworthy that Donald Trump is actually getting more African-American support than Mitt Romney did. Yes, it's minuscule, but that's always true of Republicans. But it's more than Romney. And the same is true of Hispanic support, for all the furor over what he said about building the wall. his Hispanic numbers are actually higher than Romney's. And it's fascinating to me that Hillary is backed up against her firewall in Pennsylvania and Virginia, which, by the way, Trump can win the election without those two states. All he has to do is have what he has now, plus New Hampshire and one of Maine's electoral votes, which would be 5 added to 265, and he's over the top. Also, look at Michigan, which hasn't voted Republican in many elections, is moving towards him. In Colorado, that's another state to watch. I'm not so concerned about Florida or Ohio. I read a report that the Clinton campaign, in fact, has abandoned Ohio in order to focus on Pennsylvania. And if Pennsylvania, which is moving towards Trump, goes for Trump, then the election's over.
All right, Minter Dial, I'm seeing reports that aren't quite as rosy for Donald Trump that say that actually we should expect a Hillary Clinton bump after Monday.
Well, I mean, from the debate standpoint, I think people are going to make some kind of judgments. Where I think the debate's going to happen is online, and that's where there's a lot more interesting takes. So I didn't read it that way, and well, hopefully some kind of debate will happen, because one of the problems we have here is that we're not really debating. It seems like everyone goes in their camps and fights off. So I'm hoping that we get some kind of construction. Kasich, when he went to Obama recently, and he said, I agree with Obama on this particular case. And he said a very important line. If we're not able to put country ahead of partisanship, as a country, we will drift. And I'd like to see more of that.
All right, that'll be our final word. Minter Dial, I want to thank you. I want to thank Jean-Pierre Larochelle, Richard Fowler, and James Robbins for joining us from Washington, D.C. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. Let me say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, François. So
it was a split decision among our panel about who won the debate.
I think it's a split decision. Everything's split in this election by the looks of things, more than usual. Clinton keeps her cool. This is the analysis of The Atlantic. But look at the first paragraph in this article. Monday brought the first debate of the presidential season, but it often felt like two separate debates. One from Hillary Clinton was wonky, crisp and polished, if not always inspiring. The other from Donald Trump was freewheeling, aggressive and meandering. They did, of course, those two different debates intersect at various moments, but it did seem like two different debates. And then depending on what media you're looking at, you're getting two entirely different readings of who won. Let's take a look at some of the analysis. 5 takeaways from the first presidential debate. Clinton hits him where it hurts, and Trump's boorish reaction hands her a win. That's on Politico.com. You're getting an even more sort of hard, what would you say, Hillary-friendly reading of things on
long headline.
By Ezra Klein on Vox.com. The first debate featured an unprepared man repeatedly shouting over a highly prepared woman. For Roger Cohen on the New York Times, his take on it was Trump revealed all of his shortcomings in the debate, but does it matter? Does it matter? This is the point, because his shortcomings are not being seen as shortcomings by the people who are going to vote for him. And if you take a look at this poll on time.com, they have asked they've polled over 1.6 million people, and time.com, not exactly a radical right-wing website, and Donald Trump comes out way ahead. And if you go to the websites such as Breitbart.com, the former CEO of whom is now the communications guy on the Trump campaign, they admit, okay, maybe Hillary won, but Trump is picking up the undecided voters. Those who, think Trump might have lacked plausibility, credibility. Is he really presidential? They may have been won over. And this is the key point, because debates generally tend not to convince that many people, except the small margin of undecided people. And in this case, Trump is the one who risked, I suppose, losing them if he blew his lid, which he didn't.
Yeah, what's interesting about, again, we were saying it earlier about how often these debates are called debates, but they're actually just press conferences where they stand side by side. This time they got at it, and the moderator had a big role in this.
He did indeed, and I suppose a difficult role for anyone to play in such a high-stakes debate. But NBC's moderator, Lester Holt, was criticised by a lot of the Trump-friendly websites, if you like. This is Infowars.com, notoriously sort of conspiracy theory orientated, but they say debate moderator ignored all Hillary's scandals. They were leaving all of her little goodies out. And you have other websites saying the same thing, even referring to Lester Holt as the third debater. This is various tweets also picking up on the lack of questions on the basket of deplorables. No email server question, although it was brought up in the back and forth between Trump and Hillary. No Clinton Foundation corruption charges. Nothing. I suppose there was a slight issue of time. They overran on time on a lot of the questions, and perhaps some of those questions would have been asked, but they just didn't get to it. Some tweets even saying he was acting like Hillary's press secretary.
And how about fact-checking?
Right, well, it was a big feature of the debate. Indeed, a lot of the websites, news websites covering it were doing live fact-checking. Some of the rolling news channels were even fact-checking live. And that was a very interesting added element. Certainly, Donald Trump seems to have come out as being less truthful than Hillary Clinton. But Hillary Clinton was saying, go on my website, we're going to fact-check everything that Donald Trump says. So she was trying to appropriate the art of fact-checking when, in fact, she wasn't herself always completely factual. Just a quick look at Donald Trump sniffling into his microphone because we were all waiting with bated breath, so to speak, to see if Hillary would cough, because she has been coughing. There have been health concerns, pneumonia and all of that, when Trump indeed was sniffling. And there was even a Twitter account set up, Trump's Sniffle, which sniffed through the evening. And what else? Hillary Clinton, though, did not hand him a tissue, even if the New Yorker cartoonists imagined she might have done. There you go.
All right. Thanks for that, James Green. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.